may be found in your course book as well. WSBA CLE will report credits within 30 days and request that you submit your credit adjustment immediately following the conclusion of the conference on Friday. If you have any questions, please email cle@wsba.org. The course book will be updated in the weeks following the conference. This session is being recorded for later replay. And just a note, we do have live interpretation this morning for this session, as well as closed captioning live. So those options you can choose in the bottom toolbar of your screen. And now I would like to introduce Bonnie Stern-Wasser, Alize Bojani, and Rafael Torres.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Karen, do you mind starting up our slides? It's good to see, well, not really see everyone, but good to have you all here today in the first day of the Access to Justice Conference. As we're getting the slides powered up, if the participants can share one word in the chat, one word that they think of when they think of the word immigration or the immigration system. Let's see that in the chat. And while we're getting started, I'll pass on. My name is Alize Bojani. I am the Immigration Policy Manager at OneAmerica, which is one of the largest immigrant and refugee advocacy nonprofits in Washington State. And I am also an attorney with experience in immigration policy and reproductive rights. I'll pass it on to Bonnie.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bonnie Stern-Wasser. I am the staff attorney at OneAmerica. I've been an immigration lawyer for many, many years, going far back to just before we had the last major immigration reform with a path to citizenship, which back then was called legalization or IRCA in 1986. And I'm originally from California. I moved up here in 2000. I worked for a while at McDonald, Hoag & Bayless. I've had my own law practice for many, many years. And I joined OneAmerica in 2018. And Rafael.
Thank you, Bonnie. Well, my name is Rafael Torres. I live in Yakima, Washington. I've been a resident there since 2006. You know, I migrated to the United States in 1997 through basically my parents. I've been connected with OneAmerica, and right now I'm in the fellowship program that La Casa Hogar is providing along with other students. And right now I'm focusing on trying to be part of what we believe is really important, which is, providing legal services for obtaining U.S. citizenship to people like myself that once were in a situation where we needed legal representation, and we were able to find these amazing people and associations like OneAmerica, which, make a big difference in my life. And thanks to that, I'm basically here trying to do the same as, they did for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Rafael. Thanks, Bonnie. Karen, maybe have this next slide. So today we're going to talk about the history and the context of U.S. immigration, what organizing for change can look like, talking about OneAmerica's Washington New Americans Pro Bono Naturalization Project, and then ending with Rafael talking about the challenges and opportunities when seeking affordable legal services. So I hope y'all are ready and strapped in for the ride. Before I move on to my next slide, I'm going to pick out some of the words that y'all shared in the chat. I see a lot of discriminatory. I saw racism, unfair, inequitable, arbitrary, struggling, xenophobia, injustice. So it seems like anything that we're going to share here today is not going to be news to you. So please, next slide. So I'm going to start us off in the year 1790, which was when the United States Congress passed the very first significant immigration bill, the Naturalization Act of 1790. It allowed white and free immigrants to gain naturalized citizenship after having lived within the boundaries of the United States for 2 years. This is also, I don't know if this is just the snapshot of the bill text itself. I don't know if you can read, but it does also include the good moral character language that we still see in immigration today. Additionally, limiting citizenship to whiteness forced people to litigate their skin color, resulting in various decisions from courts all around the country deciding whiteness based on skin color, public perception, national origin, facial features, language, ancestry, eugenics, or some combination of these. And this requirement for whiteness was not lifted until 1952. There were, between 1878 and 1952, 52 cases concerned racial prerequisites for naturalization, including 2 cases that went to the US Supreme Court. Karen, if you would go to the next slide. This case, Inri Ayub, is one example of what litigating whiteness looked like. The petitioner was Chinese, had immigrated to the United States, wanted to petition for citizenship, but was told in colloquial terms, Chinese folks are clearly not white. Therefore, you are not allowed to have citizenship. Next slide. So in concurrence with court cases, Congress was also very active and continues to be active in immigration. So one of the major exclusionary acts was a Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The picture that you see is of a cartoon in one of the San Francisco newspapers showing Chinese migrants being barred from entering the United States while welcoming a lot of other folks. This act was the first significant restriction on free immigration in US history, and it excluded Chinese laborers from the country under penalty of imprisonment and deportation. It also made Chinese immigrants permanent aliens by excluding them from US citizenship. Chinese immigrants in the US now had little chance of ever reuniting with their families, starting families of their own in their new home. And then the Geary Act of 1892 went further and required all Chinese residents to carry proof of residency documents, without which they would be subject to deportation. This was also the subject of one of the CLE articles for this talk. What accompanied, and then finally the Immigration Act of 1924 restricted immigration from Mexico, Japan, and Eastern and Southern Europe. So our immigration policy was based specifically to include immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, and it perpetuated racism and really lifted up eugenics theories and in particular anti-Chinese rhetoric, which is very similar to what we see today. Congressmen at that time explicitly subscribed to eugenicist ideas that white people were somehow scientifically superior to all other races. But they also rationalized restrictions on the basis that immigrants were stealing jobs, that they were unhealthy, prone to spreading disease, and overall uncivilized. There were also claims of immigration fraud and people immigrating by taking advantage of permissive immigration laws. Ultimately, the United States immigration law became a way of ranking immigrants in terms of desirability and ability to assimilate into the United States. For example, the Dillingham Commission was established in the early 1900s to study immigration. The commission report recommended the implementation of a literacy test for immigrants as well as a quota system. And then keep in mind that this is all federal, so I'm not even talking about the state level restrictions that existed, which were often worse than the federal exclusions, particularly in California and Washington state, both of which saw significant numbers of Chinese migrants. Next slide. And two of the main United States cases around Chinese immigration in particular were Che Chan-ping versus United States and then Fong Yu-ting versus United States in 1889 and 1893, both of which challenged congressional actions. In the Che Chan-ping case, under the Burlingame Treaty that was signed between the US and China, free movement was permitted between the two countries, and that the citizens of each country would enjoy the rights, would enjoy permanent residency rights and the same rights as citizens in either nation. So Che Chan-ping came to the United States in 1875, returned to China for a visit in 1887 with a re-entry certificate. So he did everything he needed to be able to come back. However, in the time that he was abroad, laws changed and he was not permitted to return. And the United States Supreme Court held that any returning resident non-citizen could be excluded if Congress decided that his race was undesirable or for any other reason. And it was the same situation in Fong Yu-ting. Non-citizens could be deported because of their race or for any other reason. The message from these cases then is that where the status of immigrants is concerned, almost anything goes. Congressional power to determine who may come and stay and who may not is virtually unrestricted. So these cases gave rise to the plenary power doctrine, finding that Congress has complete legislative power over the admission of aliens. The origin for this doctrine, as illustrated through these two cases, is firmly rooted in racism and eugenics. And these cases were the underlying cases that allowed policies such as the multiple travel bans under the Trump administration. Next slide, please. So we're moving into the more modern era. This picture that you see is one of Border Patrol rounding up Mexican immigrants who came to the United States under the Bracero program and sending them back to Mexico. So the Great Depression, backing up a little, resulted in a lot of backlash and anti-immigrant sentiment. In particular, folks felt like immigrants were taking advantage of New Deal programs. Once again, like I said, parallels to what we're still seeing today. But the Bracero program was a contract labor program that existed from 1924 to 1964 in response to a severe labor shortage due to the world wars. So in that time, 4.6 million contracts were signed, with many individuals returning several times on different contracts, making it the largest US contract labor program. However, it also resulted in exploitation, low wage conditions as employers took advantage of this program, and an increase in unauthorized immigration because of the bureaucracy and heavy burdens for people to use the Bracero program to come to the United States. At this time, anti-immigrant sentiment was rising, and Border Patrol was also controlled by very racist people. So they lobbied President Eisenhower to deport the Mexican immigrants who were here and working. And so this resulted in Operation Wetback, which is the name that the government chose to give to the program, to round up and deport roughly about 1 million Mexican immigrants, as well as some legal immigrants and US citizens of Mexican descent. This is the largest deportation program carried out by the US government. For example, in Chicago, 3 planes a week were filled with immigrants that flew into Mexico. In Texas, 25% of all of the immigrants deported were crammed onto boats, while others died of sunstroke, disease, and other causes while in custody. The deportation stopped only because the operation ran out of money, but it was seen as a success by anti-immigrant politicians. So in that time, there was another major piece of immigration legislation called the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1952. This law finally lifted restrictions on Asian countries, removed race as an exclusion for immigration and naturalization, updated national origins quota to be 1/6 of 1% of each nationality's population in the 1920 census. So I will repeat, 1/6 of 1% of each nationality's population in the 1920 census. What that effectively means is that it gave preference to immigrants from the UK, Ireland, and Germany. President Harry Truman vetoed the bill, citing discrimination against Asian immigrants, and decried the absurdity, the cruelty of carrying over into this year of 1952, the isolationist limitations of our 1924 law. Congress overrode him to pass the law. And then the Immigration Act of 1965, passed 1 year after the Civil Rights Act, abolished the discriminatory national origins quota system by eliminating race, ancestry, or national origin as a basis for denying immigration to the United States. However, numerical restrictions on immigration were maintained. Next slide. And then I'm not going to go into the specific multiple bills that have recently come out and the multiple laws that impact immigration. What I will highlight is that what we've seen is that since 1986, we've seen only increases in enforcement, criminalization, and increased grounds for deportation, reducing judges' discretion, increased marginalization of low-income immigrants, increased surveillance of Muslim immigrants in particular post 9/11, and all of this as a parallel process to the overall increases in sentencing, limits on judicial discretion, 3 strikes laws, and the hyper incarceration of men of color. So since 1986, we have had no legalization or any other pathways to citizenship open up. What we have just seen is an increase in immigration enforcement and meeting every benchmark of enforcement without any legalization. Next slide. So what can we do when federally there are not a lot of options, and there may continue not to be a lot of options? You may have seen recently the news that the Senate passed a budget resolution that includes a pathway to citizenship for certain categories of immigrants to the United States who are undocumented. However, that still does not fix the fundamental issues of the immigration system, such as a lack of access to a social safety net for many immigrants. And that's where organizing on the ground comes in. As you know, we have all been dealing with a pandemic that hit last year, and undocumented communities in Washington state in particular were hit very, very hard. Without access to unemployment insurance, without access to good health insurance, without access to the basic social safety nets that many of us can take for granted, communities were struggling. So OneAmerica joined a coalition of other immigration organizations and labor organizations in Washington state to advocate for cash assistance to these communities. And we won. We won $340 million through the state legislature and through investments from the governor's office, but really through dedicated advocacy from folks on the ground. So this means that we partnered with grassroots organizations, we partnered and talked with our own grassroots leaders and asked them, what do you need the most? And one of the things we kept hearing is that folks need some level of social safety net, including unemployment insurance. So that is one of the projects that I am currently working on with OneAmerica, is trying to figure out how we can structure an unemployment insurance program that can include undocumented workers, but still deal with federal restrictions so that folks' privacy information isn't shared. Folks' information is not shared with immigration enforcement, that it avoids public charge, and that it still gets people the things that they need. And in order to figure out what folks really want, we conducted surveys, we held listening sessions, we worked with our leaders to provide testimony to our Senate and House representatives, and we created a bill. Unfortunately, our bill did not go anywhere, so we're working with agencies over the summer to figure out what we can do so that next session we could bring back another bill on unemployment insurance. We also won big on working families tax credit this session. to include ITIN filers. So those folks who are undocumented but still file taxes so that they can get that credit. And finally, one of the things we're working on is democracy through the Washington Voting Rights Act in a case called Aguilar v. Yakima County. So under the Washington Voting Rights Act, every voter has an equal opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice to local government position. We are challenging, along with plaintiffs and folks impacted on the ground, Yakima County's at-large voting system and asking for ranked choice voting because for OneAmerica, this relates directly to our mission to advance fundamental principles of democracy and justice at the local, state, and national levels by building power with immigrant communities in collaboration with key allies. And that includes advocating for voting right reforms and increasing civic participation and turnout among voters in immigrant and refugee communities. So we have our hearing at the end of September on this case. Next slide. And this is just a quick recap of some of what we fought for in the legislative session, but I have 5 minutes for questions if anyone has any questions.
Eliza, I do see one hand raised. I'm going to allow that person to ask their question live.
Sure. Someone's asking a question. I cannot hear it.
The person who has their hand raised, if you prefer to ask the question in the chat box, you can do that.
While we're waiting for that, Eliza, could you talk a little bit about the federal dynamics right now on immigration reform?
Yeah.
Kind of what's happening there and what we hope people will help work toward. Thanks.
Yeah. So as you know, we had Democrats currently control the White House, the Senate, and the House. However, there are very narrow majorities. And in particular, in the Senate, you need 60 votes to pass any kind of bill, which means that really formerly popular bills such as the DREAM Act, which would give citizenship to DACA recipients. Thank you, Sarah. Maybe your son had a question. He's welcome. So those bills are going to have a really hard time getting through the Senate. So what we're focused on right now is hoping for a budget resolution strategy. So because that just needs majority vote, and hoping to incorporate some of the DREAM Act and some of the other bills to include a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients, TPS holders, essential workers, and farm workers, and have a pathway to citizenship there. However, there has not been a lot of talk about other types of immigration reform that are sorely needed, such as more funding to USCIS. Yes. Thank you, Philip. And that's why I wanted to ask that first question about what, in one word, you think of the immigration system, is because I wanted to be very clear that our system is based on racism and continues to perpetuate systemic racism. And I have been through the system as well. So I hear you, Philip. Well, I think it's okay to pass it on to Bonnie now. If there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And we can see if we have time to get to them.
Sure. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk for a minute or so about sort of the lens from which I come to this area of law and advocacy and practice. I'm from California originally. However, my maternal grandfather is from Austria. He brought his siblings over here in the late 20s, early 30s, but lost his parents and other family members in the Holocaust. My in-laws were from Poland, a very small town in Poland, and my mother-in-law came here also about that same period with her siblings over the course of about 10 years. But she went back to Poland to marry my father-in-law, so she was able to bring him here, but his entire family was killed in the Holocaust. When I was in law school, I did not study immigration law. I didn't have it on my mind. It was something that I had not planned, but I had clerked in the U.S. Attorney's Office and applied for the federal government's honor law graduate program. And I was selected to work for INS. And while I was in court, I learned about asylum law and heard asylum claims from around the world. I eventually, after 2 years, went into private practice. But also during that time, I read books on how Nazis were able to get admitted to the US, but many Jews were turned away during World War II. And so the whole idea of both our impact on our political and foreign policy abroad and our immigration laws being very restrictive and racist and discriminatory still to this day has sort of informed my view about immigration law over the years. I've been a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association since the 80s. And if you are thinking about practicing immigration law, I highly recommend joining that organization. It's a national organization with about 15,000 lawyers around the country, and each state has a chapter. The Washington chapter here is wonderful. I always consider my colleagues there my brothers and sisters. It's a very tight community and we work well with one another. Next slide. So we've also been an innovative chapter in around 2001. A colleague of ours, Paul Soroff, started the first statewide pro bono naturalization services. And AILAWA is a fully volunteer organization in Washington. We don't have an office or paid staff or anything. So all of this pro bono service was designed and carried out, by volunteers. Over the next couple of years, we enlisted the help of different partners, one of which was Lutheran Family Services, and Skylar Kinza Skylar from there sort of ended up coordinating the logistics for our naturalization services. And then in 2008, I became the chair of the AILAWA Washington Citizenship Committee. And that's when I met Pramila Jayapal, who's now our representative in the Seattle area in Congress. At the time, it was Hate-Free Zone still, and she created Hate-Free Zone after 9/11 when Sikhs and other people of color were being harmed after 9/11. And so we created this partnership where OneAmerica, which is what Hate-Free Zone became, would provide the logistics. They would do the outreach to find clients, they would find the facilities, and then the lawyers would show up and provide free legal services all around the state. In 2008, we also received funding from the state of Washington and created the Washington New Americans program. It's funded through the Department of Commerce. We have to advocate every 2 years for renewed funding. And we were successfully able to do that in the last legislative session. What we do with that money is we take half of it and we re-grant it to about 15 to 17 other nonprofits in Washington that also provide naturalization services. They might do one-on-one legal services, or they may do outreach and other related naturalization programs, such as doing community events on why to apply for naturalization, how to do it, what information they're going to need, and then steer them to either our program or one of the other partners. We also get some funding from the New Americans Campaign, which is a coalition of similar naturalization programs around the country, and the City of Seattle. And because we were the first to put on these programs, we have become a model around the country. So AILA started having national citizenship days, usually in April. And other organizations around the country have put on similar programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about our model in a few minutes. Next slide. These are our partners for this fiscal year, which just started July 1st. So basically what happens is they each have a contract with OneAmerica, and they are required to handle a certain number of N400, that's the application form for citizenship. And they have to help us with some of our workshops. And then they also do outreach. So they're all over Washington. They represent different constituencies, ethnic, religious groups, etc. But we all work together. And part of my job as staff attorney is I do monthly or semi-monthly webinars on legal issues related to naturalization. I provide a newsletter. We have a listserv where we talk about different immigration issues. And then we also do an annual convening where we all get together over 1 or 2 days and do a more intensive training session. And I should say that some of these organizations have legal staff, and some of them have, or most of them have, what are called Department of Justice, DOJ representatives. In the world of immigration practice, the Board of Immigration Appeals, the BIA in Virginia, they have rules that regulate who can appear before them. And appearance includes submitting applications with a Form G28. That means that that's a notice of appearance before the different agencies in the immigration court. And then the government or the court will communicate with you. And there's 2 levels of DOJ reps, those that can appear before USCIS, the main benefits granting agency, and EOIR, which is a subcategory of the Department of Justice where the courts are, and they have a slightly different notice of appearance form. So in order to become DOJ accredited, you have to apply to the Board of Immigration Appeals, show that you've had certain training, you have resource materials, and the organization that you work for also has to be accredited by the BIA. So of the categories of people that may appear before USCIS and EOIR are licensed attorneys who have not been disciplined, law clerks under the supervision of a licensed attorney, and DOJ reps. And then there's another category called, I forget the exact name, but it's like a friend or a religious person who is not charging for a fee. And there's a lot of fraud in terms of services and service providers in the community. And so all of us do a lot of work on trying to educate the community on who is allowed to submit paperwork and make appearances before these agencies. Next slide. So the way our programs have worked is in the past when we did in-person workshops, we did 2 big multi-site workshops a year, one in April and one in September, usually at 3 sites. So generally one on the west side, a site in like central Washington, and then often out in Pasco or some other locations. And then we started a few years ago doing what are called roving clinics in between the April and September clinics, where we would find partners such as Western Washington University in Bellingham. We did one years ago out in Port Angeles, Aberdeen. I think we've done one in Mount Vernon, Vancouver, a couple other places. And then in 2018 or 2019, we started a partnership with Perkins Coie, one of the biggest firms in Seattle, doing them once a month at their Seattle office. And people would come twice, first for a screening and then for what we call quality review, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we've also had obligations with our contract under the New Americans campaign to do some workshops with other partners who are not our grantees. So we've done those a few times. And one of the biggest ones we ever did was with the city of Seattle on Trump's inauguration day, where we had like over 1,000 people come. We had tons of volunteers and we were down at Seattle Center. It was a really exciting day and also kind of depressing too. So the way our physical clinics worked was, so people would either, depending on the location and the numbers of people we were striving for, people would sign up in advance or be able to just show up. And then we'd have volunteers doing, we'd have a category of general volunteers helping with setup, food, signage, things like that, directing people. We had attorneys and DOJ reps doing screening. We'd have paralegals drafting N-400 applications and fee waivers. And then we'd have another round of attorneys and DOJ reps doing quality review. Our policy has always been to have the highest level of service and to prevent people from ending up in removal proceedings or going to a naturalization interview by themselves and then ending up having trouble. So we always have at least 2 sets of legal services eyes on every application. Then we would prepare the applications for them, print them out, get them all ready and put in an envelope already pre-addressed. All they had to do was add their filing fee if required and stick it in the mail. And then they would be responsible for the rest of their case, you know, going to their biometrics interview, responding to any correspondence, and then going to their interview and testing and swearing in. With COVID, we've had to redo everything and we decided to do online services. There is a coalition of groups that work a lot on helping each other with this kind of thing. It took us a few months to get our program set up, but we started doing the virtual clinics in June of last year. And we've had quite a few since then. So we've kind of eliminated the paralegal role at this point. And what happens is people sign up online and then they fill out an application by themselves in a program called Citizenship Works, which was designed for nonprofits doing this kind of work. And then we use Zoom. We do the same with the screening and quality review, except it's all the documents are online. And we put the attorney and the client in a separate Zoom breakout room. For all our clinics, in person and online, we have roving experts, which are people with a lot of immigration experience. And we also have criminal lawyers on hand to help with sort of the crossover of crimes and immigration. And so they can jump in and out of these Zoom rooms. And then when folks are done, we put them in a room with our organizers so they can learn more about our organization and how they can get involved. And then finally, our staff has been printing out the applications and mailing them if people don't have ability to do that, or we help them finalize everything and give them the instructions to file on their own. The thing that's kind of happened with the virtual clinics is that our staff has become more consumed with client management, which is something we really didn't want to do originally. And our biggest question, based on the data that we've been collecting, is who are we missing? Because we know that there are digital inequities around the state and not everybody has access to good internet service or even technology at all. Next slide. Here's just a picture of the last in-person one we did with the Port of Seattle. We have a partnership with them. We've been experimenting with different things like the clients sit in one place and the volunteers come to them versus the volunteers sit in one place and the clients come to them. So we've been doing that. Next slide. We just submitted our report to the state last week, and here are just some demographic information. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. Hey, Eliza, can you put my email in the chat? If anybody wants a copy of the report or has other questions about our program, she can tell you how to contact me. Next slide. And yeah, so most of our in-person clinics have been in partnership with community colleges, most recently universities, churches, banks, the Port of Seattle, and other local partners. Next slide. And these are the different roles for volunteering on our program, Washington New Americans. And Eliza, can you put the link to WashingtonNewAmericans.org? It's WANewAmericans.org. For people who want to sign up or get clients to sign up, that's our website. These are the different roles, and there are some experience requirements, and those are on our website as well. Next slide. These are some of our happy volunteers and why they volunteer. Next slide. We are a qualified legal services provider. If you're an attorney and need credit, we have a 2-hour training video, which I'm probably going to update this summer. And then you have to check in and out of each clinic and you self-report. Next slide. And then the other activities that WNA is involved in, Washington New Americans, we sued last year on a proposal to reduce the fee waiver rule. Right now, the filing fees are $725, and we obtained an injunction on that rule. And then the government, right after that, proposed to increase the filing fees to $1,150. We sued on that to block it. They were also going to eliminate fee waivers altogether there. Although public charge doesn't really come up that much in naturalization, we were involved educating the community on that in a broader coalition. And public charge is a ground to deny a green card or a visa if you're not making enough money. And Trump had tried to tighten that up. And then we were involved in travel ban waivers and naturalization stuff. And right now we're working on with coalitions to try to improve naturalization services and making it more accessible and affordable. Next. Oh, and by the way, we just got a $5 million budget item in the King County budget that will help people with filing fees and other wraparound services. It's not ready for implementation yet, but stay tuned. Next slide. And then we look at citizenship or becoming a citizen as just the beginning of a lifetime of civic engagement. And we are working with our clients and others to try to empower them with skills that they will have to become more engaged in their community, some of which Raphael is going to talk to you about next. And we are looking to broaden our program to increase racial equity. We've been doing a lot of outreach to Black immigrant communities lately. And then we have leadership development and are hoping that more immigrants and naturalized citizens will run for office. Next slide. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Raphael. I don't want to cut into his time, but if you have questions in the chat, I'll try to respond to them.
Bonnie, we actually do have 5 minutes for questions.
Oh, okay, great.
And there were a few questions, so let me just throw them out there. So one of the questions was, is there any effort in Washington state to push for state level voting rights for non-citizens?
Yes. Lisa, are you working on that?
Very, very little. I think it's still in the formation stage as far as I know.
Yeah, I know that we have some people doing some legal research on that. One of the issues, especially for becoming a US citizen, is there are questions on there about, have you ever falsely claimed to become a US citizen? Have you ever registered to vote or voted? And there is some case law that, you know, some jurisdictions have like local ballot initiatives or like school board member kind of things. But if you have a ballot that has both federal candidates and initiatives and state ones where non-citizens could vote, then that is problematic for immigrants trying to become US citizens. And so there needs to be this very clear line division that there's no chance that this could be considered a false claim to citizenship.
And one of the bills we worked on last legislative session came out of a case out of Shoreline where a non-citizen was elected to the school board, and when she went to be instated, they found out that she was not a citizen, and therefore, even though she was voted to be on the school board, they would not let her take her seat. And so we asked for that inclusion. So this is not even about voting, right? It's more on the representation side. And that bill did not pass. But that is one of the areas, instead of statewide voting, maybe looking at smaller local elections and going from there. And there is some precedent for that in some other states, like in California and San Francisco and Maryland and certain cities in Maryland. Okay, so there's a couple more questions. The one that came up when I was speaking, but it's for any panelist, is what lessons can advocates take from the near miss of federal immigration reform in the early 2000s, when there seemed to be momentary bipartisan support, and what can we learn from that effort in advocacy today? And I answered just basically, we can't let up on the pressure. We have to keep it visible, and we cannot depend on things. We cannot depend on our members of Congress to do the right thing. We have to keep moving the demands, making them visible, and trying to get stuff passed in a partisan manner, frankly, because I don't think we're going to get that 60 vote threshold. And if we do, it's going to involve some really bad compromises that we do not want.
Yeah, from my perspective, since I've been doing this so long, many of my colleagues in my age range, so to speak, were kind of jaded at this point. But I'm feeling hopeful right now because I think the combination of social media, progressivism, more people voting, there's more pressure now to forge a path no matter what than we've ever seen. The problem that I feel is that there's a lack of education among congressional people and staff about how immigration is an ecosystem. You have, and it's all like a puzzle. All the pieces have to fit together. You have enforcement issues, you have legal immigration, which is all about what line do you get into? Is there even a line to get into? So that is a function of categories to immigrate and numbers available. And then what to do about the undocumented population. And even if we had a fix for them, what are we going to do after that to reduce illegal immigration? Again, that goes back to, is there a line to get into? And then we have justice and fairness and due process and all of that related to the courts and the way the agencies work. And the problem is that in 1986, for example, when we had IRCA that did a fix for undocumented workers, it also put the rules against employers that they can't knowingly hire unauthorized workers, which was never really enforced that much. And then ever since, we've had only enforcement-only legislation and criminalization of immigrants and more deportation and reasons why you can't come here. And we've never really fixed the legal immigration system either. So all of these pieces have to work together. And that's what we need to be advocating for.
All right, on to you, Raphael.
Thank you so much. Well, like Bonnie was sharing, the interest for me to be able to, be a part, to follow after, getting help from OneAmerica in the beginning. Basically that was the first step for me to try to be engaged with our community, was because I was one of the clients which, I got legal advice. I was able to get help with my citizenship. I had engaged in a difficult problem in my past, which put a little bit of difficulty in for me, for myself and my family to be able to achieve that. Being a son of an immigrant, I didn't actually notice or didn't know how big, racism it's played, within our government until I had to live basically with it. When I met my wife, everything was really great, was really good. We had our first kid, and eventually, things kind of got a little complicated. My wife didn't have a status, right? I had a status, but I could still not be able to work in peace, be able to focus on other stuff because my wife, she wanted to achieve, bigger dreams. She wanted to go to school. She wanted to be able to work freely, and she couldn't do that because of her status. And it wasn't until the time when I was looking for legal representation, not having enough money, if you may say. At the time, I was working 12, 13 hours. I couldn't provide enough, for my family. My wife couldn't do much to help us because I tried to keep her away from, the possibility of, being detained by ICE, being deported, and then having to face the fear of, coming back home from work and finding out that my kids are in the detention center, and that I had to now live through, through all the proceedings after her deportation. And it was a scary time. For me, it was really, really scary. Thank to God, we've eventually found OneAmerica to one of her acquaintances. At the time, I remember she was getting assistance from parents and teachers through one of my kids. And as soon as I started getting, getting to know OneAmerica, I got all the tools, all the information that I needed. I was able to obtain my citizenship back then. After that, it was just a path to follow, and finish. I was able to get her adjusted status. She was able to basically go to school, start get a higher education, started working with La Casa Hogar, which that's the organization I'm involved with. And I'm trying to get basically trying to acquire enough knowledge and training to be able to get an accreditation through the Department of Justice as a JD rep. And it's just been amazing how just how just a single step makes everything a lot easier, just not just for one individual, but for an entire family. And that's basically why I'm involved. I'm being encouraged by many, one woman, Bonnie, to basically have or gain the knowledge, having the tools in my hand to be able to make something, to make a change for, anybody in our community, because we do need to speak up. We do actually need to be able to raise our voice and be able to let other people that don't know what to do in this harsh times, that they're not alone. We have rights. We can actually make them, acknowledge our rights, and just kind of keep this working, because it's not just for one individual, it's for an entire nation. And so I believe that this is really important, and that's why I'm part of it. And I'm really, really excited that I'm get to know this many amazing people that have share the same passion, the same dreams, and then we can all together put a little bit of our effort to be able to change a whole future for this entire nation. This country has been so great for me, but I still can't believe that this racism that lives within our nation is so great. and impacts so many people in so many different levels. And a lot of them have to do with our government. And so we need to be able to make a change. We need to make them acknowledge that we are here, that we are important, that we provide and we care for one another. But for them, we're still, without status, we're still just like a disposable tool that they can use whenever they feel like. And I don't think it's right for anybody. And so, I strongly believe that we gotta continue. We gotta, keep the fight strong, and we just gotta keep on trying until we actually get what our communities need the most, which is, legal representation to make ourselves or be heard. Basically, try to gain more ground and within the government that actually represent our communities that are in so much need, for this type of services. And I could have not done it without OneAmerica, without La Casa Hogar, all these places. They're really trying to do the best they can, to help our communities, and that's what I'm here for. We want to make a change. Thank you.
So Rafael, there is one question, which is, one of the question is, what educational or other resources are available to immigrants and non-limited English-speaking participants in understanding and preparing for benefit-based adjudicative proceedings? And I believe Bonnie pointed to the USCIS website, but I was hoping that you could maybe talk about La Casa Hogar, or even Bonnie, if you could talk about Washington New Americans and what those programs do to be more accessible, particularly for the population that we're trying to serve. So maybe we can start with Rafael.
Yes, of course. Well, for me, in my experience, I have to work with OneAmerica and La Casa Hogar. I have gone a couple of trainings that they had provided for us. Also, basically the website, the USCIS, has been really great for me. To be able to get certain knowledge on certain aspects within, for example, in my case, the application, the N400, the basic requirements, and such information like that. But to me, I would say that it's individually different. It's basically up to the person. For me, for example, it's more of hands on deck. I work, I get my knowledge, my experience through actually doing something, with somebody, and I get most those experiences are the most rewarding for me. And so I would suggest that if anybody wants to find out a little bit more, they can kind of engage and get to know us and be able to, attend, even citizenship clinics, and be able to witness how all this takes place.
Yeah, and then I would just say the following, that in terms of resources, although I gave the government resources, they're actually pretty good. And I recommend, if you're an immigrant yourself, always use the .gov websites. Watch out for those titles that have a .com, because they're probably fake. There was a slide, if you go back through your materials, where I listed our partners. A lot of them do other types of immigration, not just naturalization. At Washington New Americans, we just handle naturalization. Our next clinic is October 9th, and I put that in the chat as well. We're taking signups now for both clients and volunteers. And then other resources, definitely the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I would say that many law practices are divided into these categories. You have folks doing business immigration or only business immigration. Lots of people do family immigration. I'd say about half of the immigration lawyers do removal defense. So you need to look for people that specifically do that if you're out of status or have dealt with ICE or are in the court system. And then there's other people that do a variety of things. We do have a website I should do, it's AILA.org, and there is a find a lawyer website, and I should have put it in the materials and I forgot. I think it's AmericanImmigrationLawyers.com, and that's a searchable database. You can do by language, you know, removal proceedings if you need it, by zip code and that sort of thing. I'm trying to think what else would be a good resource. There is a good blog put out by our foundation, the American Immigration Council, that talks a lot about current policy, things happening, news features. And then, you know, besides the nonprofits, you know, for people that need specific help, I'd say look for an immigration lawyer. We also have a wonderful partner here in Seattle, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. They also have offices in Granger and Tacoma. However, they're very, very busy, but they're excellent. And they do some of their work in-house, and some of it they partner with pro bono lawyers. So that's what I would recommend as well. There's also King County Bar has neighborhood immigration clinics. I'm assuming they're doing them by virtually now, usually once a month. So if you go to King County Bar referral services, there's a subsection on neighborhood immigration clinics.
And I will put in another plug for the citizenship clinic. I joined OneAmerica during the pandemic, so I've only ever known these wonderful people via Zoom, and I've done the online clinics, and they are really great. They have wonderful interpretation services, really knowledgeable attorneys, and it was a wonderful experience to volunteer. So.
Raphael, you touched on it a little bit, but I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what your original search for legal services was like and what obstacles you faced before you found our program.
Of course, Bonnie. Well, it was very difficult. First of all, it had to do with you know, having the means, you know, having the economical resources, and the second of all had to do with the distance. You know, I remember there was an instance where I had to actually travel all the way to, you know, it was Granger, right, to be able just to get advice, just a simple advice on a question that I had. And that simple question took me the entire day. So I had to actually lose a day of work to be able to obtain an answer for my question. And it didn't do much at the time. You know, we still needed more. Eventually, you know, it took me, I would say, 4 years. You know, when I was able to realize that you guys were here and you guys were doing a clinic up in Sunnyside, and I took my chances. I decided to take a day off, which, you know, back then it was a little harsh for my family because I just couldn't afford to take a day off, you know, if I wasn't going to be able to get the results that I needed or that we desperately wanted. And eventually I went. You guys took care of me, guided me through the whole process, and I was really, really excited that at the final step, I was able to say that my application went through within, you know, within the year. You know, I would say I was able to be standing and taking the oath and actually, you know, obtaining my citizenship. And after that, it's been so great. You know, one example of those is I'm here on vacation. You know, this is the first time that our family had a real vacation. Back then, it was just a little hard for us to do that. And I couldn't think of a better time, you know, to say I'm glad and I'm really excited that I was able to meet you guys because you did an amazing job. And now I'm looking at the fruit, you know, after harvest, like we say. And yeah, you know, I'm strongly believe that all these is necessary, and you know, change can happen, and it's a big impact on on people's, lives, and that's what it pushes me, it drives me to do the same for others, because if I had the tools, the power to do so, and I wouldn't do it, I'll be selfish, right? And so I do want other people to experience and to acquire the same things I have. And so that's why we're here, the same battle. We're trying to make it happen.
How'd you feel the first time you voted?
It felt great. That was, like you said, back when Trump was getting pros for president. And so even though I didn't like the result back then, I was at least I felt really great to be able to say, you know what, I can actually make my voice count today. And I actually went and did it, and after that. And now that's why we have our president, Joe Biden. And I'm excited. And I'm really happy that he was actually chosen to be our president today.
Well, I should say that there's some good news coming in right now about path to citizenship in the Senate budget resolution last night. So we're a step ahead, working towards where we need to go. And yep, everybody has the right to call their congressman, even if you're not a citizen. So do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That Senate passed that budget resolution and now it's moving to the House. So particularly if you live in an area with a Republican House of Representatives member, it's a good time to call them and let them know that you support the inclusion of a pathway to citizenship. If you want to, no big, and then there's one more question from Philip. Is any thought being given to allowing dependent children to be allowed to reside in the United States while waiting on the official process? Now 2-year wait on visa applications, which is a huge amount of time in a young person's life. As far as I know, no. It's hard to know about this particular situation, but I would say that there was a proposal in one of the standalone bills a while back dealing with making spouses and children of green card holders become what we call immediate relatives. So there's a whole system of what we call preference categories. These are the ones that Elise was talking about, had annual country caps of whatever you said, 0.01 of 0.6% or something like that. So when demand exceeds supply, which it always does, there's a waiting list, which we call the quota or the backlog. And there's another group of people called immediate relatives who are spouses, parents, and minor children under 21 who are not stuck in quotas. And so there was a proposal to put the preference category of spouse and child of a green card holder, treat them as immediate relatives. But this is part of the whole system of legal immigration that needs to be fixed. And it's not part of the discussions going on right now. It's all about pathway to citizenship for undocumented people. And I'm hoping at some point we'll start seeing some movement on legal immigration, because even if we fix things for the undocumented, we have to think about the future and future flows and lines to get into. And this is part of that discussion, which I personally find is really important to have when we're talking with our congresspeople. But that's for another day. All right, folks, it looks like we have 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions? Any last thoughts? Thank you all for being with us here on the first day of the conference.
I just wanted to mention something that we're doing, and Raphael has been participating in it, and he may want to talk about it further. But at OneAmerica, part of our theory of change is to build power in immigrant communities, and we have been doing a series of Power Building Institute trainings. Raphael just attended our first one, and our next one is actually this weekend on advocacy and electoral work and further base building. And perhaps one of you might like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I can share a little bit of my experience, Bonnie. Well, to be precise, if you're a little bit kind of like me, you're coming from a different background, you're not too familiar with, immigration laws and all this, proceedings. And so it's really, really instructive. We talk little basics about how the government is established, how we can actually be able to achieve to have our community be represented. And one of them basically starts with voting, right? Once you get to vote, you select, the person that you believe is going to represent you the best. And so you're just trying to support them, try to push that agenda. Then eventually we got training for, even communicating between, trying to gather information through individuals, just regular conversation. And it was really, really instructive. I strongly believe that, yeah, this is really great. Anybody can, join and be able to just witness, what I did. Can't explain with words. It's just you are all welcome to be able to join us, if you will. Alisam, you want to add something too? No? Well, everybody's welcome. Thank you.
I'm typing a response to Vanessa's question, so just give me a second. Well, actually, I'll just talk about it. Vanessa asks, what do you think that attorneys working in the civil system or the criminal system can do better to connect with non-citizen communities about those legal issues? So first of all, one of the best groups to get to know in Washington is Washington Defenders Association. They train criminal lawyers on the immigration consequences of crimes, and they also help us immigration lawyers with criminal issues. They're amazing. Please get to know them. Washington Defenders Association, and their website is defensenet.org. Secondly, I believe there is a ethics opinion, or maybe even a court rule now in Washington about not using immigration status in certain civil cases where it's not relevant. I believe these have come up in the sort of personal injury and family law areas where opposing counsel can't use someone's immigration status to basically, for lack of a better word, screw them in court, and where it's not relevant to the case. The other thing is that there is a Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, and a Washington Supreme Court decision that says that criminal defense lawyers must advise their clients of the immigration consequences of a plea. And so what I've seen over the years since those cases came down is either the client will call like last minute, I have a hearing tomorrow and my criminal lawyer asked me to talk to you about this. But what's better than that situation is where either the client hires a lawyer that has what we call crimmigration, both crossover of both areas experience, or the criminal lawyer works directly with the immigration lawyer on trying to craft an immigration safe plea. There are some other things that I've seen over the years, especially in the family law system, where a American or green card holding spouse calls and says, I want to deport my spouse, how do I do that? And generally, I answer with something like, if you're breaking up, it's time for a new chapter in your life, and it's not worth the effort, because ICE, if you report to ICE, they're usually not going to look into that sort of retaliatory situation unless the immigrant has done something wrong or they suspect there was fraud in a marriage-based case or something like that. So I think it's always good to ask about your client's background and history, but you have to be careful on the rules in that area.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank
And I
you
agree
so
with-
much.
Yeah, I agree with what Eliza says too. In the policy area, think about the immigration impacts of any policies you're working or supporting to change, and make your position through that lens.
Great. Thank you all so much. What a great panel. We are at time, and so we will now break for lunch. Thank you, Bonnie and Elise and Raphael. And for the rest of us attending, we will start up again at 12:45. Have a great lunch.
Thank you for the great questions too, everybody.